Sup Shredders! My name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an SB Reacts, where today we got ourselves 3 tracks from an act named Ashtray Jonny, off of the Americant album. And if we switch over to here, I presume it's the Americant album, we've got Money Talk, Smoke Alarm, and also Lost on the Lost Norf. Apparently, Ashtray Jonny is an independent artist from Greensboro, North Carolina, whose music refuses to stay inside one box, which I presume means that we explore a lot of different genres, which is quite cool. And we're going to listen through each of these 3 tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Let's do it. Money Talk.
All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. Let the money talk, real shit. I'ma see the shit. Eyes of a house. You ain't playing with me, baby. Can't play around with me. Make me feel like that I'm crazy. Make me feel like
Great combination of elements here.
sometimes I feel like I'm slipping. Late night when I'm getting deep up in the feeling. I feel up on the dollar. I pull up by the collar. Bring a man and out. Got pounds of the Ramada. You think about a pilot. I think about a dollar. Grill him up Carrabba's. Hit him on a pasta. Never been impossible. Watch how I get this. Did it so good. Now they can't forget. Now late night. I just talk to the money. They used to laugh at me when nothing was funny. All alone in the night. The money talk to you.
Great reintroduction to that bass there.
All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. But I'm burning, all about my earnings. Niggas say shot like I was raised by the church. Back when it was switch to sweet, pull up in the car with D. Got your best but not to eat. Fuck it, we'll just get some weed. What the fuck is wrong with me? I just want some company. So I caught a girl right over and she started just humping me. Street burns 3rd degree and it's still scorching me. Guardian angel escorting me. My life a book of poetry. My life a book of poetry. Can read a page. Deja vu, I done seen this day. Never told you that cause I want you to stay. I get confused when I light the blunt and pray. Late at night, wish I slept at the bank. If it ain't about mine, don't give a fuck what you think. In the streets, real deep and get a fuck with a drink. Hold on, the money's talking like, what did you say? All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. Money talk to you. Money talk to you. Money talk to you. All alone in
Yeah,
the night, the
solid.
money talk to you.
Good reintroduction there.
The money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you. All alone in the night, the money talk to you.
Great use of echoes there. I was kind of wondering if we were going to do the full repeat of the hook line, but I think doing like a half take on with the fade outs and echoes at the end was a smart move. Because in each of these post-track sections, we're going to do an individual song analysis of lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But before we go any further, what do we think this track is about? I think the song simultaneously discusses how, when we're alone at night, the money talks to us, but I kind of feel like it's also integrated with the kind of intimate connection that we have with another person, getting all kind of like lost in our feelings, as well as the more physical aspects of it. It's kind of how that sort of money intertwines with all of that and the complicated feelings associated with that. And now late night I just talk to the money is an interesting line. Is it like a past tense thing that we used to be with other people and now the money is the thing that we're most focused on? I'm not sure. Maybe that is it. That we've got a priority towards money now as opposed to maybe different things beforehand. Regardless, I think that it's an interesting story. I feel like part of what makes this track pop off are the vocals, the rap parts, some of the melodies, the sung parts as well. I dig the varying interpretations of the way we communicate with the listener. I think that, 3 minutes for the length of a track, right right, slap bang within the middle of the 2 to 4 minute sweet spot is a good length with a varying amount of sort of choruses and hook lines. But it's just so important to not take the listener's attention for granted. And I appreciate that the words come through clearly, but that we also use really adequate stylization, some sort of tuning on the voice in a way that kind of makes it sort of very sort of like natural for the genre, whilst adding a bit of coloration to the mix that otherwise might not be there through the use of like the chest voice that we have in a lot of other parts. It's just great sort of tonal textural contrast as well, different voicings between the verses and the hook lines. Also the verbalizations of those kind of parts as well are good there for a bit of kind of rhythmic device there. And there are lots of other sort of like vocal led melodies and overdubs and ad-libs and stuff there to kind of, I suppose, facilitate ear candy and provide a more interesting experience. Also the use of the vocal echoes in certain parts to make the most of the space that we have when the vocals aren't there is really nice. Our production quality on across the board is tight, and I've got no complaints at all about the way that we sort of like do our thing on the mic. I think that we show polish here. Considering these are unreleased tracks, I think they're going to get a good reception when they come out. And there's these catchy hook lines and sort of riffs as well that we bounce off in a way where we're kind of aware of the need to not be too abstract with our phrasings there rhythmically as well. We've got the fundamentals sorted. I mean, aside from the vocals, which are the main focal point, you've just got the rest of the track itself, which you can get 3 minutes as well, fleshed out with a variety of different verse, hook, and instrumental parts there. A mixture of different basses and guitars and drums and other elements there. I think there's a really pretty sounding guitar in there. I think that the tone of the guitar in there is very pretty. It's got this kind of like lo-fi, kind of like sort of like faded aesthetic to it. That makes it very kind of like low key, and it gives it a sort of sleepy feel, especially with the extensions of some of those chords. I like the fact that we're comfortable just having the guitar as an accompaniment to the vocals as well. They were not feeling the need to establish too many things at the same time and overwhelm people. When we do bring in the drums, like around the 30-second mark, for example, we have some clicks there that are kind of sharp sounding, not in a way that's like aggressive, but just in a way that cuts into the mix and allows you to both understand the kind of music that we might be making, whilst also providing a great sense of additional pace and purpose to it. When we do bring in some of those kicks as well, they've got a kind of a subtle thump that is more sort of like attenuated within those hook sections where things get very sort of bouncy. I just like that dynamic range there, with the mixture of quarters and eighth notes there. We have the kind of cicadas, chirpy triplet hi-hats as well as we move forward in those hooks and the verse sections. Amongst the skirt kind of stuff that we have up top there, there's just all these different rhythmic elements there that kind of heighten this track and really create a lot to pay attention to. They offer a lot. I think again the thump of the boom ba boom ba boom with the use of those extended chords on the guitar is great, in the bass and the low end ruminating around those root notes is the absolute sensible decision here. To go to sort of progressive or experimental with the bass here might be a little bit counterproductive. I also like that actual bass notes in that like lower range aren't all there all the time. Sometimes it is just the kicks, but other times it is like you can actually hear the bass kind of dancing around a little bit, and it's just a natural way to sort of staircase things. There are also these kind of pads in the background which I haven't really mentioned up until this point, but they reinforce some of the notes that the guitar chords that the guitar is doing, as well as the bass lines there, and they're just a great sort of misty sounding mid-range layer that kind of goes on the sides of the stereo field and doesn't try to sort of argue too much with the vocals with what they're doing. I just feel like we've got the frequency spectrum covered here. There's enough going around the stereo field. I just feel like we've got the frequency spectrum covered here, the highs, mids, and lows. There's a nice shimmer and sheen to the vocals, which is as much sort of like an actual vocal style thing as well as a post-production thing. Thematically, it's minor leaning, but done in a way where it has like a bit of it's kind of suave sounding. It's got this sort of quiet charm and sophistication to it, I think, with the way that it's kind of low-key and understating things potentially. The more that you have to pay closer attention to the lyrics to really figure that out, what's going on there. I think the extensions again elicit a sense of emotional nuance within the piece. I mean, this isn't necessarily a happy situation. It's not even bittersweet. It's just an interesting sort of mood that's calibrated here. I feel like that's important in this day and age. If you make things too sort of like, that way or the other, it just becomes a little bit kind of detrimental to the grey areas that we have in music. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering, though, is tight. Again, the vocals, pads, the guitars, bass, drums, any other sort of bits of ear candy we have, all the different takes, and the sides, the stereo field, left and right sides of the cans as well, filled up with things moving around and also you being enveloped within the music. There's great use of compression, echoes, reverbs, delays, sort of like in tuning then on the voice as well, which is less present in some parts than others for stylistic effect, and the layering of all those different elements and tracks is very good. There's dynamic range from post-production and compositional perspective, nice and loud, sidechaining, thumps, bus compression limiting is handled, and we're off to a great start. Smoke Alarm, track number 2.
100, ayy. I'm in the hood like a smoke alarm. Go ahead and roll it up, what you smoking on? I tried to reach you, but I ain't have a longer arm. Yeah, she let me beep like the smoke alarm. Beep, beep. Yeah, she let me beep. My life is really deep, it ain't never been sweet. I got problems deep down.
I love those organs and how they flutter.
Give everything I got just to see what it brings us. Beep, beep. I'm in the hood like a smoke alarm. I used to sell the bag till the smoke is gone. Beep, beep. I'm in the hood like a smoke alarm. I used to sell the bag till the smoke is gone. Beep, beep. I'm in the hood like a smoke alarm. I used to sell the bag till the smoke is gone. Beep, beep. I'm in the hood.
Very cool response with those vocal takes.
Get a lot of money, like the day shift. They gon' pay to watch. This is Netflix. My life's a movie, bitch. Ain't ready for the next flick. Hold on.
Ain't ready for the next flick. I like the wordplay that we have within
I
this.
ain't tryna take your pick. Drop my drives. Girl gon' set the dick. I hear applause when I step up in it, bitch. You want in there on them late nights under that street light. I'm tryna make me a dollar. I'm tryna watch for a cop. Beep beep, I'm in the hood like a smoke alarm. I used to sell the bag till the smoke is gone. Beep beep, I'm in the hood like a smoke alarm. I used to sell the bag till the smoke is gone. Beep beep, I'm in the hood like a smoke alarm. I used to sell the bag till the smoke is gone. Beep beep, I'm in the hood like a smoke alarm. I used to sell the bag till the smoke is gone. I ain't tryna OD, I ain't tryna RP. They do you dirty, then repeat. Ain't no stand up on the beach. Can't drink the water from the sea. Keep it P, got keep it G. Ain't wanna be, don't wanna be. I just wanna be me.
Smoke Alarm, track number 2 today. That's an interesting one. I kind of, the last line cemented it for me. He just wants to be him. He just wants to be me, you know? I feel like there's nuance and more that we learn about Ashtray Jonny with each time that we listen to a new track. And I know that should be a given, but it isn't always. Some people are incredibly guarded with the way they want to represent themselves. I just like the different angles that we've had so far, and I assume that'll be similar to Lost on the Lost North, if I'm not mistaken. But in terms of what I think this track is about, it's potentially about Ashtray Jonny feeling like, when they go into the hood, they feel like they're a smoke alarm just because they maybe stand out, or maybe they're making too much noise, or like they don't belong or something like that. And then what eventually happens is we get to a point where, you know, we talk about not being ready for the next flick. We're not ready quite for the next chapter yet, but we're kind of getting to a point where we sort of have to find ourselves regardless, if that's not mistaken. I could be wrong there, apologies if I am. Nonetheless, I think that it's an interesting story, and there's a lot going on here, and I feel like I need multiple listens really to sort of figure out the whole kind of like angle of it. But regardless, I think that it's very pleasant. There are so many different ways that we express ourselves and vocalize throughout this, with the different sort of like repeated hook lines and main sort of like melodies over the top of the instrumental components there. The various ways that we rap, and like we have a similar delivery and flow and cadence to our lines. It's just that we voice things differently. We adjust our texture and timbre and our sort of like our presence there. And I think that's really kind of like a micromanaging thing, but in a positive way. We're looking at every single bar and going, is this important? Is this relevant? Is this what we need? And I just feel like the words are coming through clearly. There's very much attention to detail. It's very much music that is intended to not allow you to sort of look or listen away, which I appreciate in this day and age where attention spans are lesser. I also dig the call and responses that we have, those heavily washed out chorusy kind of filtered, those parts that go around the sides and kind of flow out there. I think that's very neat. It is kind of smoky sounding the way that those reverberate. So that's interesting imagery that's put forward there. And I just feel like you know, we're continuing to find ways to interact and engage the listener. But absolutely no filler within this track. I mean, at 2 minutes 08, with the catchy hook lines, the varying expressions and rhyme schemes within the verses, we just make fantastic use of that time there. There's a couple of hooks, you know, there's a verse section or two, and then we're basically done. We have that intro section there, but we don't really allow more than a few seconds before we get into the main crux of the track with the surrounding elements there. It is very much a case of, you know, min-maxing it. I do dig that we're allowed some time at the end of the track just with the reverb tails to sort of ponder what we've just heard and sort of identify with it, or like try and imagine their perspective there. I think that if you immediately rush into the next track afterwards, it's just kind of a little bit too intense. And I think that, like, again, with the understanding that a lot of the emphasis and focus with the focal point on the mic, on the singing, on the rap parts, etc., you've got a reliable backing and accompaniment there that kind of saunters its way through it, and again, a very sort of sleepy sounding way, and a way that kind of reminds me Money Talks. We've got some consistencies there with what's presented in the mix. I love the flutter of the organs there, the way that they push forward and they kind of warble on the sides there, and that extension there, it's like a 7th or a 9th there. It's just very kind of like classy sounding there. It's not this way or that, adds a bit of sort of jazziness to it. And the bass line dances around, boom, boom, boom. It's almost like a double bass or something like that. And I think that's kind of special because what it's saying is, I could have used an 808 here, or I could have used an electric bass, but I want something a little bit more analog just for textural purposes there. It's easier to make it move around the scales and modes associated as well when it's a bit drier sounding. The drums with a mixture of quarters, with a quarter note focus, but with that some 8ths and sort of like swing 16th syncopated parts. It's just a bit more minimalist than the previous track there. I don't think we're trying to sort of get the person moving at a high pace when they're listening to this kind of track. It's more kind of like walking through this down the street with them, hearing the truth. There are also these kind of, again, I've said sleepy a lot, these keys there on the right or left side there that kind of twinkle, and they're just a great sort of sub lead and mid to higher end resonance there that finds an easy sense of presence within the arrangement by proxy of having less there when the vocals aren't sort of saturating that. And I really think like there's probably stuff but those are the main parts to it, you know, the bass, the keys, the organs, the drums. You don't really need more than that. You can have those main components there, putting forward chord progressions, putting forward a bass line and an alt melody to sort of follow along to occasionally as either a call and response. But when you've already got call and responses with vocals, it does its job. And again, the track is short enough to not need more than that. I think it's, again, great use of time thematically. I think this track is minor leaning, but the extended harmonies, you have some of those chord progressions for 7ths and 9ths, etc. They invoke a sense of intrigue and sort of like introspection there, like we're trying to figure out who we are there. We know that we're not entirely happy with it, but there's more to it than just a blunt sort of feeling of yes or no, so to speak, in a similar way that Money Talks represents that. And I dig the fact that we're allowing a complexity within that, and we're not trying to make it too accessible in that regard, especially with the amount of things we have going on with the storytelling. I think that it would make less sense for it to have simpler major or minor chords. It's just, I'm just thankful that we know da ba da da da, that like we have these melodies that are sung and put forward there that get stuck in your head because of the repetition and how satisfying how well they work in terms of chemistry with the surrounding elements. The studio recording, mixing and mastering, again, great use of vocal processing here with the various EQs, compression, reverb, etc. Great use of having a very different sound to the vocals, less kind of like solid with the call and responses there, the parts that swing around the sides. Again, great sound design with the organs spreading around and sort of like vibrating like that as well. That was very cool. Drums, bass, you know, like a nice sort of like acoustic tone to that bass, which was neat. And then anything else kind of twinkled with a sense of studio bass dynamic range. Nice and loud bus compression limiting is handled 2 for 2. Very, very good. And then we have Lost on the Lost North, track number 3 for today.
Fuck your feature. You so hot that they won't release you. Fuck the lease up, cracking sneakers. Rap so hard that I beat the speaker. JC versus Nas in a smoking ether. You don't want me, girl, I don't want you either. Who them hoes over there? I don't want them neither. Stand up, baby, gotta clean your knees up. Crack your cheese up, you're holy like Jesus. I'm in and wipe it down, hello, how we the cleaners. Why she picking the cheese up? I'm just tying the cheese up. Pass me that out the freezer.
seed, but it just won't grow.
Lost on the lost north, lost north. Lost on the lost north, lost north. Lost on the lost north, lost north. Lost on the lost north, lost north.
Hell yeah, man. Hell yeah. Sincerely. Sick stuff, man. Really happy with that. That was Ashtray Jonny with Lost on the Lost North. The third track off of this record today. I think this is potentially my favorite track off of the album, Americant, if I'm not mistaken. I'm still thinking on that, but what I think this track is about, especially with that seed but it won't grow comment, and as well as asking the questions, because it took me a bit to sort of understand some of what we were talking about here, especially some of the heavy tuning. It's more an explosion of emotions that we have in here. It's almost like we're trying to find ourselves, but we're just really struggling to do that, find our way. Again, we feel like a smoke alarm. We're just kind of lost at this point. It's just we've got these questions and we're overwhelmed by feelings and we're sort of like absorbed by the money kind of thing, or at least our priorities have changed. And we talk about other people within this, but I just think it's more about the feeling of what do I do when I have tried to put this stuff into motion and it doesn't succeed. I think that's my kind of angle for this. I could be wrong, and I apologize if that's the case. It's my sort of my best take on it that I can, without listening through it another time, because I try to do these on a first listen basis. I think that what works well here is just the heavy tuning on the vocals on the microphone. Usually, especially if it's the first track, if I don't get the words through clearly, I'm kind of like, is this working in terms of communicating to the listener what we need to in order for this track to be effective? But within this song, we've already heard that we can sort of speak more clearly, we can rap clearly, we can sing clearly. So when we have that held note about the 120 mark and it just kind of fades in, fades out, and then goes back into that main sort of beat behind it, it's very satisfying. It's like we're self-aware of the fact that we're really kind of playing into it. A lot of this is just an outburst of emotion there. The intensity of that tuning, that stylization, that synthesis is what we're trying to express through this in a way that's quite heavy sounding, if I'm honest. And it's interesting because there's this phenomenal glow to the instrumental backing behind us that kind of juxtaposes some of the distress that we're going through. I kind of think that this is a very special track. I think that we start with some spoken parts at the beginning, and there's an interesting sort of rhythm and flow to that, but we really just don't wait to get into the full kind of build of it. I beat the speaker. It's just, it's loud and bombastic, and the track represents that quite well. And we kind of change our range there. We explore different positions as we grow with the music, and we kind of go up with that until we sing ourselves out. We've got an entire array of interpretations and vocalizations here, and I feel like it's well fleshed out, especially at 1 minute 56. Providing all those different ideas on the microphone is one thing, but to do it within that shorter space of time, to even have what it amounts to like a solo section at that 120 mark is just dope. It's really cool. I like the fact that this is more sort of through composed, if I'm not mistaken. We weren't necessarily relying on a hook verse kind of thing with this. I could be wrong. It's just neat to allow a shorter track to be more of a concept as opposed to being a loop. And so, no filler whatsoever. There's dynamic range to it. And the main instruments you have, there's actually a plethora of different ingredients, right? Of course, you have the bass and the drums as per prior. We have some guitars in the background playing some sort of like aesthetically really pleasing kind of grandiose lines there. You got the keys kind of exploring the triads associated and playing some notes that glitter with gold. And the tone and melodies of the vocals just work well in the high end as well, kind of further emphasizing the kind of beauty of it. I like when we have the choirs come in and there's also some strings there, really filling out the mid-upper range, kind of lifting us up. It's anthemic, to be honest. And we change the chords we play in different progressions, and it feels very organic in part because we're not relying on like a 4-bar loop over and over there. It seems like we're evolving and going somewhere. It's also testament to the understanding that we shouldn't be sleeping on the percussion for us to not only roll with like a 16th note kind of groove with the hi-hats, kicks and snares, but also, or the claps, but also have some faster kind of drum fills and stuff like that on those snares as well. It's nice to change the beat there and kind of continue to keep it fresh. And of course, like with the Lost North part, you have the keys and the strings and other pads sort of continue there until you get to the end of it. And you have this kind of space because of what's there and what isn't. But there's just a fantastic pull to the bass there. I love how vivacious the entire composition and arrangement is. But yeah, it's just great to know how to staircase it effectively from a compositional perspective. And it's also good to know that we understand our fundamentals of music theory and composition in terms of the melodies and harmonies and how they interlace and interact with each other. We've got a good head on our shoulders. We know what we're doing. And it's also just the sounds, the instrumental choices and the mood they invoke there. This is a lot more uplifting than the previous two tracks. It's almost like we're on this big adventure and we're not really sure how it's going to go, but we're kind of we're wound up in the overall sort of like feeling and the spectacle of it, so to speak. It's exciting, but it's also kind of scary, you know? And so thematically, I think it like would resolve to a major, but I also can understand and facilitate the argument for a minor key leading throughout this. The brightness and general sort of like mid to upper resonance of a lot of these instruments encourages me to say that this is more kind of working towards a happier direction there, but there is some doubt there. And so I think that kind of bittersweet nature to it across the board, but especially when you consider what's been said from like Ashtray Jonny in certain parts, it's just it's well nuanced there, and I appreciate the complexity to it. I just like the fact that we have different chord progressions and bass lines, and we sort of vary the way that things are put forward. And just in general, as a closing note, the studio recording, mixing and mastering on this one is phenomenal. I love how things are put forward, how they've been recorded and produced, how they're spread within the stereo field as well as the frequency spectrum. And I just have got no notes in regards to this. The way that the notes hold and how we have, again, that dynamic range, that difference between quiet and louds on the tune vocals and that little break section, the sounds, it's just nice to listen to. And I don't often say that, you know. I just enjoyed listening to this song, even though I know they're going through stuff. It's a bittersweet thing. But yeah, leveling, dynamic range, bass compression limiting is handled, great thump to things, and great mixture of sort of like more modern digital and analog elements. We're going to talk about these tracks more though in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of these 3 tracks off of the Americant album from Ashtray Jonny, titled Money Talk, Smoke Alarm, and Lost North. In this section, I'm going to provide an overall analysis of these 3 tracks, from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts. From a listener's perspective, I should also say here that these are like overall generalized comments as opposed to specificity with per songs themselves. Like, I've already done per track song analyses, so if you want to check those out, feel free to do so. But before we go any further, what do we think this album is about? I think if I take the title Americant and then, you know, think about what we've discussed today, I think this is about the trials and tribulations of someone who is working the way forward as both a human and a musician, looking at the way that money affects them, the way they kind of talk to it at nighttime, the way they interact with others and their own expectations, the way they don't necessarily fit in with Smoke Alarm and they just want to be themselves, but they're struggling to kind of have that identity and facilitate it. And then Lost North is more of a, because I think they previously reviewed, they released, should I say, a project called Lost North or something along the lines, if I'm not mistaken. I was having a look through this stuff earlier today. And I think that this is more a seed that they planted earlier and they're now not really sure how to push forward with it there. That hasn't been growing. They're facing a certainty with halfway through it. And I think that it's an interesting thing to discuss. I don't often hear music within this genre talk about how we're feeling uncertain about how we're doing with stuff. And I kind of dig the nuance there from an emotional sort of like thematic perspective. I feel that with all that in mind, the way that we discuss things, that we rap, that we sing, that we kind of like do air candy with and overdubs and the other percussive rhythmic elements there was just so much to talk about that again, it'd be a long conclusion section if I was, again, having more specificity with it. It's just, it's a situation where wherever we are putting forward a sort of like a catchy melody with interesting sort of like note choices and sequences that suit the surrounding harmonies, with a rhythm flow and cadence that just kind of is either bouncy or more sort of steady when it needs to be with the low key parts. It's where we have those rap sections in different range of different sort of varying expressions to sort of micromanage individual lines and present them in certain ways. The call and responses we have, we kind of interact with each other. And any other points where we're a bit more sort of like, again, low key, or where we just kind of sing a note and hold and it kind of floats over each other, such as in Lost and Lost North. There is just so much to appreciate in regard to what Ashtray Jonny has put forward here. Like, unconditionally, I'm really stoked that I had the chance to listen through it. They make some great music. And I think that as a listener, you couldn't really ask for more, especially if you do like this style of music there. I think they've got something really special going on. And again, I think when this releases, people are going to enjoy it. The tracks themselves at like, you know, a minute 56 to 3 minutes or so are well fleshed out. There's various sort of like verses and chorus sections and instrumental parts, and there's intros and outros. A lot of these tracks just kind of finish on an echo or like a closed note there. And I like that. I think that gives you time to kind of ruminate or at least ponder some of the things that they've put forward there. I feel like if you kind of blindly go straight into the next song after you've already sort of exposed the listener to quite a lot, it's just a little bit overwhelming, especially considering the nature of production in certain genres of music nowadays. It can already be quite a lot just by listening to the main crux of the song itself. So I appreciate that while Ashtray Jonny is the focal point throughout this piece, that we have beats behind us with a mixture of different guitar, key, bass, drum components there that do make the best of these worlds. I mean, the drums are fantastic. We have a steady mixture of different sort of like hi-hat, sort of snare, click, with some fills as well, and kick patterns there where sometimes we're more sort of thumping away with a consistent persistence with the 8ths and 16ths, and I like the bounciness of it. Other points we're simply more focusing on the cymbals, or like a more low-key, slower kind of groove and halftime there with some occasional sort of syncopated and offbeat parts there. Other times we have no drums at all and we just allow things to float, which I think is a smart idea as well, because again, if we oversaturate or have too much of the same thing, it is too much. The bass lines are usually more sort of like root note oriented, although in Smoke Alarm we did move around a little bit with a kind of a double bassist tone that I thought was sensible. It was just nice to have movement there on the low end, almost like we are creeping around. And I think that that's just sensible, having different tones and textures per track for a similar kind of purpose there. When it needed to kind of be a bit more independent, it was, and when it needed to boost, it did. The guitar takes that we have with some of the extensions and other parts are just neat there, but I also like some of the leadish elements we have in Lost and Lost North there, because they're more sort of anthemic and euphoric and have a kind of wider, grandiose feel to it. The keys as well that you had either working between arpeggios, root notes, or extensions there, also playing some little melodies occasionally as well, some ear candy-ish components. We also had some fun sort of synthy ideas in certain parts there for leads, and we also had some pads there for a bit of kind of mid-range resonance with some of those extensions just to further facilitate a connection to those guitar or bass parts. Each of these ideas, plus others I might not have mentioned, they culminate to 3 tracks there that feel like they fit together with an album, and they form a cohesive narrative. But not in a way where anything feels forced. There's a compositional sophistication there through the chord choices, the harmonies, the adjustments of bass lines and progressions where it feels incredibly organic. And also there's this natural development and progression through the staircasing things, the taking and adding of different elements there. Again, the uses of the main 4 rhythms, the quarters, 8ths, triplets, and 16ths. As well as, we weren't really going into chromaticisms or anything like that. But I think, thematically, it's about how these things integrated, but also, again, the persistent catchiness and kind of like the earworms that you had with certain hook lines and melodies from Ashtray Jonny, with how the beats behind them gave them a platform to be on, with some of the sort of realer elements as well, still being pleasant to listen to, but they were more sort of like grounded there. But I nonetheless appreciate all the different ideas we put forward within such short form factors, and I don't feel that there was any filler And I don't also feel like there was a note out of place. I know this sounds like a profusely positive review. It's because it is. I don't feel like I'm needing to glaze here. A lot of this stuff is just very well done. The studio recording, mixing, and mastering is the icing on the cake. I feel like whether we're sort of more straightforward with the tone of our rapping or sung parts, or if we're kind of going full into the stylized synthetic kind of like tuning kind of stuff, I feel like either way, it both suits the genre of music that we're making and works well to push everything else forward. You know, whether it's the guitar, bass, drums, keys, strings as well. I didn't mention the strings. The strings within Lost in Love North sounded absolutely gorgeous, and they just had this thick, full, rich sound to them that was kind of ballad-esque. And it's just those different inclusions, those different ingredients that form a really wonderful, you know, great use of the stereo field, especially some of those cool responses with Smoke Alarm, if I'm not mistaken, going all the way out to the sides, as well as the organs in Smoke Alarm, the way that they're from a sound design perspective, they not only reinforced the chord progressions present, but they also just gave you something else to kind of pay attention to. Fantastic dynamic range from a compositional production perspective, nice and loud, pumping, bus compression limiting is handled. But yeah, just fantastic time listening through this record. No applicable constructive critique. And then from a final general listener's perspective, I wish that I could start my day reviewing music with music like this every day. It's just very cool. I had a great time with it. I feel like I learned more about Ashtray Jonny in a way which was mutually beneficial. I hope they can find themselves and be comfortable with who they are. And I wish everyone involved all the best of luck in future with their musical endeavors. Because thank you for watching my review of these 3 tracks off of an album titled Americant from Ashtray Jonny. These songs being Money Talk, Smoke Alarm, and Lost in the Lost North. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via the various social medias. And I'm sure this will be on all digital streaming platforms. And stay cool and stay safe. And please remember to support your local musicians and artists supporting time, as you need to help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I will catch you in the next SB Reacts. Spiderhands out.